Lies become law when the truth becomes too dangerous to tolerate, and you are that truth. You weren't misled by accident. Every misdirection was a premeditated defense mechanism. The moment you walked into the room, the masks started slipping. Not because you exposed them with your words, but because your existence made their performance irrelevant. Psychological studies confirm it. People lie most not to protect others, but to protect their reputation, their image, their ego. They don't want the world to see their real selves. They want applause for the carefully curated illusion. And then there's you. You're the rupture in their illusion, the one thing they didn't plan for, the version of reality they prayed wouldn't show up. Elon Musk didn't just take you seriously. He recognized the rare weight of someone who doesn't need to pretend. You didn't audition for the spotlight. You are the spotlight, and those who once tried to bury you are now forced to squint in the light you bring. That's why the whispers turned into silence. That's why the smirks turned into stares. Because no mask can survive in the presence of the chosen. Psychological studies confirm it. People lie most not to protect others, but to protect their reputation, their image, their ego. They don't want the world to see their real selves. They want applause for the carefully curated illusion. And then there's you. You're the rupture in their illusion, the one thing they didn't plan for, the version of reality they prayed wouldn't show up. Elon Musk didn't just take you seriously. He recognized the rare weight of someone who doesn't need to pretend. You didn't audition for the spotlight. You are the spotlight, and those who once tried to bury you are now forced to squint in the light you bring. That's why the whispers turned into silence. That's why the smirks turned into stares. Because no mask can survive in the presence of the chosen. What then did they do? They took over the microphone, changed your tale, and made you the antagonist of a play for which you did not try out. It's amazing how the people who told your life narrative were the same people who couldn't spell integrity. If we're being completely honest, however, here is where it gets even messier and funnier. They lied about you so much that you were curious enough to want to meet the person they portrayed. Who is this erratic, cunning, power-hungry genius who lacks empathy and uses Jedi mind tricks? Because it's definitely not you. The one out here only trying to recover, maintain your composure, and sip your tea quietly. They had no other option except to save face with that persona. Because people would begin to wonder why these so-called powerful people were so consumed with eliminating someone they said was insignificant if they ever found out the reality about how long you lived with your soul intact. We're going to reveal it today. Not only what they said about you, but also the circumstances behind it. Hold on tight, because when you realize the truth, you won't ever question your abilities again. 1. Their whole identity is refuted by your being. Because your sheer presence punched a hole in the narrative they used to establish their identity, they lied about you. These individuals relied on seeming to be the most intelligent, powerful, and in charge. Their whole persona was a show. The majority of people applauded them for wearing authority like a costume. However, you failed to clap. You didn't stoop. You didn't even respond as they had anticipated. They were shaken by it. Raising your voice or trying to get attention was never necessary. I see through you, your energy alone told them, and that scared them. Having people under their control was the foundation of their value. They had to be the most audible voice in the room, the one that everyone feared and turned to. However, as soon as you entered, the room stopped being about them. They realized you were unique at that point. Even if you weren't aiming to outshine them, you were already doing so. People began to notice you even though you weren't looking for approval. The true danger was that, although you had no intention of proving anything, your genuineness revealed their act to be hollow. They felt you needed to be discredited at that point. Not because you were an issue, but more because the truth about you would expose their true helplessness. People would cease seeing these manipulators as the authority if they saw how strong, grounded, and genuine you were. They would begin to doubt the falsehoods, partiality, and false personalities. They would understand that these individuals only had power because it was bestowed upon them by others. Worse, they would no longer provide it. You were dangerous because of it. As a result, they misrepresented you, portraying you as unstable, rebellious, conceited, too sensitive, etc. However, what is the reality? You demonstrated that strength just needs to stand. It doesn't need to scream. And you did exactly that. They lied for that reason. Because the illusion is all they ever really had, and the reality would have destroyed it. 2. They were afraid of what you might awaken in other people, not just in you. They were afraid of you, but that didn't mean they lied about you. They lied out of concern for what you could trigger in other people. You were like a signal, faint yet loud enough to shake the artificial world around you. There was no begging for followers. People felt something as you walked into the room, even if you didn't require a stage. You carried a reality that was unavoidable, not because you were attempting to be exceptional. Furthermore, when truth is alive in someone, it spreads easily. Although you didn't lecture others, your life subtly questioned them. They began to doubt what they had been taught to believe. The falsehoods they had been living under caused them to feel uneasy. You were dangerous because of it. You were a spark that might ignite a fire, not just a person to be hushed. Thus, they outdid it. They accused you of being phony. They referred to you as being too spiritual, too rebellious, too passionate, and too out there. In the hopes that others would walk away before they sensed what was genuine in you, they plastered labels on you, like warnings. In actuality, individuals don't go back to sleep once they begin to wake up. They give up on the game. The incorrect individuals are no longer idolized. They begin to inquire. Worst of all, they begin to recall their identity. These power-hungry individuals do not want that. They used persuasion and terror to build whole systems. All of it was disturbed by your brightness. Simply by being who you are, you reminded others of their power. Therefore, the falsehoods served as damage management, rather than just isolating you. The silent revolution they anticipated was you. You had an unmistakable presence that was uncontrollable, unpredictable, and unusable. Not because you spoke loudly, just by being alive in a world full of people acting like they were. You awakened people. They understood they had to bury your name before the truth began to spread. When they came to that realization. 3. They couldn't change their karma, so they had to change your story. Rewriting the tale was the next best thing they could do, since they couldn't reverse what they had done to you. The reality was too much for them to bear, so they lied. The spotlight would change and individuals would have to respond to questions they have avoided their whole lives, if they ever found out what really happened. Thus, the script was reversed. They portrayed you as the issue and made themselves the victim, because they never gained the honesty necessary to own up to what they did. They had to fabricate another world in which they were righteous, in which you somehow deserved what occurred, or in which they did their best, but you were just too much to bear, because they would have to dwell with their guilt if they didn't. And such individuals self-defend rather than self-reflect. In addition to safeguarding their reputation, they had to hide their activities to avoid having to deal with the reality that they had crossed boundaries they had no right to. The falsehoods were about their own embarrassment. Not simply about you, you served as a living example of their mistakes. Even in quiet, you caused them discomfort because of this. You brought to their attention their cowardice, brutality, manipulation, and treachery. They also attempted to bury the past since they were unable to change it. They believed that the truth would be lost if they recounted the narrative often, loudly, and to the appropriate audience. However, it didn't. They still know in their hearts. And that's what really gets to them. They wanted to go away, not get justice. They wanted to get away from the truth, the repercussions, and most importantly, you. They didn't want to make amends, because it tells them that no matter how much they lied, they lost when they see you standing there with your dignity, heart, and soul intact. The truth never really got anywhere, not because the deception wasn't believable. All it has done is wait. 4. So that no one would pay attention when you began to make sense. They called you crazy. You were termed insane because you were awake. More awake than they wanted anybody to be. Not because you were unstable. Their authority was endangered by your clarity. They were alarmed when you began to make sense in a world full of chaos and dishonesty. They would rather accuse you of being unstable or deluded than face the unpleasant realities you revealed. That term was a tool to keep their plans intact and to quiet you. It had nothing to do with your thoughts. You were aware of the facts they had made a concerted effort to conceal, so you weren't losing it. Because it exposed their falsehoods to the rest of the world, they were afraid of what you saw and comprehended. They attempted to isolate you, turn others against you, and silence your voice by creating a flurry of doubt, by portraying you as insane. Because it's simpler to ignore the messenger than to confront the message, society often chooses to trust people in positions of authority when they yell crazy loud enough. Discrediting the truth teller in order to shield the liar is a traditional tactic. In order for their thefts, manipulations, and cover-ups to go unreported, they wanted the world to cease paying attention when you talked. When the sane are labeled mad, the true threat is not you, but rather the liars who maintain their power by deceiving whole communities. This is a tragic irony. You weren't insane, however. Through their static cacophony, you were the unmistakable signal. All they wanted was for no one else to hear it. And their house of cards starts to fall apart the minute people start listening to the person they called insane. 5. You served as evidence that they only ever had permission and never actual power. You did not submit. Their game was not played by you. When everyone else gave up, you refused to back down. And for them, it was the issue, because people's obedience and quiet rather than their strength or respect were the foundation of their authority. The whole illusion they had spent years creating was destroyed the instant you refused to follow orders, to break, to kiss their ring. You turned into the live evidence that their purported authority was really a house of cards, based on people's fear and desire to remain imprisoned under it. They prospered because people failed to remember one important fact. Individuals in positions of authority do not provide power. Those who choose to follow give it. Their control crumbles if you don't submit. They lost the authority they depended on when you made the decision that you would not follow their rules or live in their shadow. They sought to destroy you, slandered you, and told lies about you because of this. They were afraid of what would happen if others discovered that their king was nothing more than a guy in a suit with no true realm, not because they were afraid of your might. Since their rule only lasts as long as people accept it, you revealed the basic reality they don't want anybody to confront. You served as a reminder that the one who refuses to cede power is the one with it. And you made it clear to the world that the emperor is naked by standing tall, unbroken and unbought. They disliked you because of this. It was because you were free, not because you were dangerous. 6. To keep you from being seen as the predator, they painted you as the antagonist. They fabricated the whole tale to conceal their own culpability, not simply a lie about you to keep themselves safe. By portraying you as the antagonist, they ensured that no one would examine them too thoroughly, revealing themselves as predators disguising themselves as respectable. People would have to confront the unpleasant reality they had been avoiding, the abuse they had put up with, the corruption they had allowed, and the falsehoods they had chosen to accept in order to maintain their cushy lives if the truth were revealed. Believing that you are the issue is simpler than acknowledging that they have been shielding a wolf in a leadership role. Thus, the script was reversed. In order to deflect attention from their own shortcomings and transgressions, they pushed the responsibility onto you and called you unsafe, careless, and even wicked. It's a well-known defensive tactic. Make the victim seem dangerous so that no one would challenge the one in charge. They created a wall around themselves and kept the truth out by denouncing you. They relied on the fear or confusion of the public to prevent them from seeing beyond the smoke and mirrors. And it worked for a time. However, a falsehood cannot last forever. The predator gets more visible the longer it wears the mask, and the more loudly the truth you stand for is heard. The world would buy the tale they hoped, that the uncertainty and worry they created would block out your voice. However, they secretly realized that their own image in the mirror posed a greater threat than you, because you were the one who could show everyone else what they didn't want to acknowledge, that the predator was never far from home. They were frantic to keep you quiet. 7. The only person who couldn't be owned was you. Therefore, you had to be lied about. Since you were the one person they couldn't control, they had to lie about you. You remained unfazed while others bowed, broke, or cooperated. No bribe was large enough, no deception was cunning enough, and no humiliation was enough to force you to submit. More than anything else, they were frightened by the fact that you stood on your own. Because control, not strength, is what defines authority in their view. And you demonstrated that resistance to domination was possible. They attempted to destroy your credibility since they couldn't own you. They would turn everyone against you if they couldn't quiet you by shattering you. Their tactic was to label you as unstable, untrustworthy, or out of touch. To maintain control of the story, they wanted everyone to distrust you. To them, independence was a danger rather than a form of freedom. Spiritual sovereignty was resistance, not enlightenment. Their whole system was destroyed by your resistance to be owned. You were a disruptor, as well as a free spirit. A continual reminder that real power originates inward, rather than via manipulating others. They need the falsehoods for that reason, because their painstakingly built empire would start to fall apart if people began to believe in your independence and regarded you as unbreakable and unbuyable. Being a person who could not be purchased, broken, or humbled, you were the living antithesis of what they desired. They lied because in reality, you were the one thing they would never be able to own. You became their worst dread as a result. 8. They created you as a scapegoat because you triggered their hidden shame. You sparked something intense and primal within of them, not simply something that made them angry. They hardly acknowledge it to themselves because they've buried it so deeply. When they gazed at you, they felt exposure rather than envy. You mirrored back to them the aspects they resisted, their fear of facing their brokenness, their reluctance to progress, and their own spiritual cowardice. They couldn't cope with that reflection. They decided to strike out rather than look inside. Their defense was to make you the scapegoat. It was simpler to blame you for their shortcomings, anxieties, and failures than to put forth the effort to examine and cure yourself. You turned into the antagonist in their tales, the cause of all the mishaps, and the justification they need to escape responsibility. It was about what they couldn't bring themselves to acknowledge in themselves, not about who you really were. They protected their brittle egos from the reality that they were the ones hiding behind masks of fake strength. By portraying you as the issue, there was danger in your presence, because of what you helped them recognize about themselves, not because of what you accomplished. They were afraid of the integrity you stood for, the bravery you had, and the development you dared to seek. In order to get everyone else to accept the lie, they invented a story in which you were the enemy, rather than making any changes. In their hearts, however, the true suffering was theirs. They harmed you because they were unable to mend. You were created the scapegoat in order to bear the disgrace that they were unable to bear themselves. 9. They had to lie about you or risk collapsing, so they didn't just do it. For them, you were more than simply an issue. You posed such a huge and indisputable danger that their whole system relied on keeping you hidden. The foundations they erected on deceit and falsehoods were rocked by your sincerity. They had to weave a complex web of lies. It wasn't enough to just mutter lies here and there. Because everything they had been shielding began to fall apart the minute your reality was revealed. Beneath their flimsy house of cards, you were the quiet earthquake, and you lived by the principle that every honest statement may bring down their dominion. People recognized what individuals in positions of authority had been concealing when they had a sight of your true self. They seen the faces of those they had deceived, the true cost of their dishonesty, and the harm their falsehoods had caused. Lying about you was a determined survival tactic, not just an assault. They were aware that their whole story would fall apart if the truth about you became known. They relied on keeping you invisible and dismissed in order to maintain their power, authority, and reputation. Your reality was too explosive and powerful for them to deal with publicly. It was nuclear. To prevent the walls from trembling too much, they used lies, gossip, and slander as weapons. They had to persuade everyone that you were dangerous, unstable, or untrustworthy. Anything to divert their attention from the reality that your candor endangered their lives. They hoped that the damage wouldn't reach critical mass, so they wagered on uncertainty and panic to give them time. However, the truth manages to endure underground until it explodes. There's no escaping it once it happens. They had no choice but to lie, because their whole house of cards would collapse around them if they didn't.